Very, very welcome to Urban Lunchtime, and this time we'll speak English. And my name is Ulrika Gustafsson, and I'm working as a sister of teachers. And today, we are glad to welcome Mohamed Sioufi, and he's going to speak, he's from the UN Habitat, and he's going to speak about the global housing strategy. And that's a movement towards adequate housing for all people and better access to housing. And for example, in Sweden, we're thinking about the Jubilee. So, today's speaker, Mohamed Sioufi from the Mohamed, and you're also Chalmers 150 Jubilee visiting professor, and Lars Ryttesvärd, director of External Futures, is going to present Mohamed Sioufi.
Thank you very much. I would just like to say a few words about UN Habitat. It is the UN city agency, we call it. Or if we start in Stockholm, 72, it was the first international conference on the human environment. That's what we're doing today. As you know, in Nairobi, where you are located, we also have UNEP, who is the natural environmental agency, which might be better now than I'm very happy to have you here, because we have beautiful colleagues. But before going into that, I would like to say that you are architect by trade of Egypt. You hold a Master of Architecture from MIT in Boston. And you are a PhD from the University of Michigan, was it? And of course, in the beginning of your career, you worked in Egypt at the university. Now, in 1995, you joined UN Habitat in Nairobi, and I did only join in 2003, when we gradually became colleagues and we worked very closely together. Mohamed, your focus has been on housing rights, global land tool strategy. The land tool sounds a bit vague, but it's really about promoting that men and women have equal housing rights, property rights, and so on. It's extremely important issue to work in principles. And we came to work together. Now since I'm there 3 years ago, you're in charge of the housing branch, and indeed the housing strategy and the competition that we will talk about. Did I forget something? I'm happy to see you. As I understand, we have been very close colleagues, so it's really a way of bringing you as a guest professor to Gothenburg, not as Chalmers, but everybody, as a school of architects, or whatever, and we still so that we can expand our relations to the global housing issues. Please.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first public appearance as in the Jubilee professorship, so it's a good start. I would like to talk today about a call for a paradigm shift in policy, in housing policy. We're basically talking about placing housing at the center, and it's one of the activities of the global housing strategy. There are 64 million vacant units in China, 18.4 in the US, 3 in Egypt, 3.3 in Maharashtra in India, just one of the states, 1.5 million vacant units in Spain, and so on. They are called ghost towns. If you Google ghost towns, you'll find not only what you see in Hollywood, these shacks where the cowboys go past, but there are big 64 million vacant units in China is town-boggling. So what are ghost towns? There's over 100 million, we estimate, vacant housing units in the world. These could accommodate 500 million people, 500 million people. There is, and yet we have 863 million people living in slums. So the supply does not meet the demand. There are different levels. The supply for the rich, the poor are languishing and suffering in slums. So, a housing strategy. What was the most famous housing strategy here in Sweden? It was mentioned earlier, the miljonprogrammet, right? Miljonprogrammet is a very good example of a numeric program. Many countries are going to build 200,000 units in 1 year. In fact, Iran has 200,000 per year, the aim is 1 million in 5 years, the same in Algeria. China has 75 million target, etc. So this is what we call an output-based strategy. It was very useful in the 60s and 70s when it was done here in this country because there was a lot of pressure, there was a need to house people. They were the booming years, we were attracting a lot of laborers from around Europe, and there was a big demand for housing. Many other countries had post-war need to build for the to rebuild what was destroyed, but also the baby boom. The vaccines in the mid-40s of last century made half the kids that used to die not die. So immediately, a family that used to have 10 children, 5 would die by the age of 5. You're remaining with 5. All of a sudden, a prick of an injection kept the 10 alive. And the mentality and the thinking did not change with that. You will not intervene in birth, no birth control, but then, excuse me, you're intervening in death, no death control. So if you introduce a break in the cycle, you should really look at the repercussions. Anyway, population boom, post-war, vaccines, etc. High demand for housing, and therefore these numeric policies were out there. We're trying to say, instead of that, let us house households rather than build buildings. And we move away from output-based strategies to results-based strategies. Results-based has of course been introduced in the private sector and then it moved to the development world. And yet today still a lot of ministries in different parts of the world are thinking about outputs rather than results. And we have the proof if you have 120 million units that are not inhabited, the ghost towns. So we're trying to have strategies. That is part of the change we're trying to instill. Why do we need it? We all know the economic meltdown, the commodification of housing and the limited access to affordable housing finance, social exclusion, urban segregation, the ghettos and the gated communities, and environmental degradation, such as urban sprawl, environmental pressures, proliferation of slums, and informal settlements. So the goals of the Global Housing Strategy, we would like to achieve the Habitat Agenda pillar of adequate shelter for all, contribute to the MDG, the Millennium Development Goal Target 7D, on slums, improving the living conditions of 100 million slum dwellers by 2020, and we're proposing a paradigm shift, placing housing at the center. Placing housing at the center of our thinking, at the center of our hearts, and at the center of the city, rather than going out and building those ghost towns that no one wants to move to. Who will be involved? We would like the Development Habitat Agenda partnerships through national habitat committees to be involved. We would like to see central and local authorities, academia, civil society, private sector, and development agencies and foundations, etc., all working together in unison to address the housing issues and problems. So the strategy aims to develop national and city housing strategies. It is a very participatory approach that guides policies, planning, and programming of housing and slum upgrading, prevention, and slum prevention, intervention. And we would like to put housing as part of urban planning and management processes, rather than dealing with housing in a silo of its own, or as part of the income of a city. You give a little bit of your budget for housing. Let us integrate housing in urban. Let us not go to the dormitory towns that are located far away. What guides us? Maybe before I continue, I'd like to see a show of hands. Who here is working on housing issues? Okay. Who here is from academia? Who is from the private sector? So I have a nice mix. That's a good partnership. We would like to see this when we talk about housing, that we're not monolithic and thinking in only one direction. Very good. So what are the elements of housing? If I were to talk about housing, what do we need to provide housing? Question, please. You want to build housing now, what? 200,000. What do you need?
Space.
Space, land, yes. Some people build on water, very few, but let's say you need land. So land is great. Space. What else? Money. Finance, thank you. And what else? Market.
Demand.
Demand, of course there is demand, yeah. Labor, yeah.
People,
But-
materials.
How about drinking in the morning? The infrastructure, right? Basic urban services. These are the three main. If you have land, you have the money, and you have the services, you can start thinking about housing. And this is where the answer of labor and materials, so that you need to design, to put together the building materials and the technologies and the labor. This is what we call the housing box. This is thinking in a box. We would like to zoom out, and this is what we're trying to do with the global housing strategy. We would like to look at another part of the picture. We'd like to start looking at the national and local urbanization prerequisites that will shape housing and will make a difference. So there we're talking about national urban policies, we talk about legislation and urban economy at the national level. And at city level, of course, we talk about urban planning, the local economic development, and legislation at the local level. If we're able to start here, we can then move to this step in a much more intelligent way, more effective, more efficient, and much better way of doing things. We always forget the post and after housing. You need really governance and planning. So you need to do tenure types. Do people own? Do they rent? Do they buy? Do they, etc. How do they relate to their houses? And we need to talk about governance. How do we govern? How do the inhabitants participate in deciding what happens in their housing complexes? And also we definitely need the maintenance and management. Then we learn lessons and the loop continues. So we're talking about introducing different thematic clusters like urban planning, economy, security of tenure, special needs, upgrading in countries where we have slums, sustainable development, affordability, and so on. These are different themes that we need to talk about and think about. We also have the cross-cutting elements of housing rights, gender, youth, and environment and climate change. And these have their own clusters, but they also have their own thinking grouping here, and they interact in all the different stages. So, our approach will be to exchange experiences, applied evidence-based research, effectiveness at scale, efficiency through partnerships, and national and local capacity development, supporting countries, cities, and countries to develop their own housing strategies that are more effective and results-based. So a bit about our approach. You might have heard that funding is scarce these days, so we, instead of going to meetings, we are relying very much now on the media, on social media and on other electronic, virtual ways of communication. We would like to identify for each of the themes that you saw the challenges, and the best people to identify this would be the partners at country level or at city level, so central and local authorities, academia I mentioned earlier, private sector, civil society, and development partners. They identify the challenges, and then we start to crowdsource. We're crowdsourcing for mass outreach, for sharing. So now we have information exchange. We analyze that information, that becomes information management. And then we don't forget, of course, the applied research, which is more knowledge management. So this cone of knowledge, of information, of responses, etc., creates the response to the challenges. We can get that very quickly, and we would like, as the Global Housing Strategy, to match the response to the challenges. A quick example, Fannie Mae, who knows Fannie Mae in the US?
Yes.
Yes, Fannie Mae repossessed 18.3 or 6 million units after the crash in 2008. Fannie Mae is the epitome of private sector of house ownership. And they came across a very interesting approach, a paradigm shift from the capital of capitalism to talk about rental housing. So they announced that they're going to put 2,500 units, they're going to give them to a private firm to rent out for 5 years. So they moved the paradigm shift for them is ownership to rental, which is a different type of tenure. This one-liner is an important piece of news. And it's very easy to transmit on social media or on the internet. And for each country to start thinking and reflecting about, is this relevant to our context? Or do we still keep 64 million vacant units in China? Or 18 million, 60 and so on. So that is the type of information, the knowledge, the experiences, the ideas and the concepts are out there. And we would like to act as a facilitator, as an enabler that brings those ideas across the globe quickly to each other. Very low cost, it's one sentence, you don't have to read 20 pages or 100 pages, but it's a concept, and the concept is what will trigger some thinking and change. So we would like to see the Global Housing Strategy as a catalyst that evokes this thinking and this paradigm shift and change. So this is one of the themes. We would like to see this happening in all the thematic areas that we mentioned. So it's like working around the clock, working around themes and on different areas of concentration and interest, and throughout our clusters. A special case is the case of slums, and we focus on that since we work mostly in the least developed countries and in the south, but not exclusively. We like to see ourselves as global, but this is where more help is needed. What happens in the case of slums? In this paradigm that I mentioned earlier, in the absence of proper national policies, economy, weak economies, legislation, urban planning, urban economy, in the absence of these, or the existence of inability to implement, which happens in a lot of countries, a lot of countries have copied policies and strategies from the west or the north, and are unable to implement for the locality and the reasons that are there. So we have slums, and UN Habitat defines slums with 5 deprivations. Access to water and sanitation, that means that basic services are not there. Security of tenure, so land, space, tenure types and legislation are not functioning properly. Adequate housing, that means the building materials and technology. The only good thing about slums is that most often they use recycled materials. That's the only thing which is environmentally friendly. But we do know that these are not stable, they are also hazardous to the people that live in those houses. They are prone to climate change impacts, flooding and rain, etc. So it's life-threatening in any case. The 5th deprivation is crowdedness, and this means that the design is not so good, and eventually everyone complains that there's no resources, no financing, and no human resources to address this. In the absence of all this, then of course governance and management become a luxury. So unfortunately, the case of slums, everything is in the red, everything is not functioning. It's a failure of the state, it is a failure of our local authorities to address planning and the prerequisites of housing, access to land, affordability, and so on. The failure to do this results in slums. So a bit on subsidies. A lot of countries see that now to address the housing problem you need to subsidize. So they start creating a dependency on subsidies, lack of dignity because you're waiting for handouts, no returns of subsidies, and you have lost fundings. In fact, I come from Egypt, and the Arab Spring happened in countries like Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya that had huge housing programs. They were building housing, but it was all clientelism. So you're giving it to your party, to the young people, So it was a dependency syndrome that was forming there, and people did not, they revolted, because it's not the physical house, it is dignity, and dignity means elections, means having a say in your local and central life, in the politics. And so the thought of just subsidizing housing for the sake of it is not the solution. We advocate for investing in economy, income generation and jobs. What does this do? It empowers citizens to access housing. Not only housing, but education, health, food, all your daily needs in life. People live in dignity, they reduce the dependency, and there is a return on investment. So you have a revolving, so whatever you do in subsidies is lost. You build a nice house, you give it to someone, the money doesn't come back to you, because the person cannot pay you back. But if you're starting to invest in jobs, if you're able to give the security of a job, income generation, etc., with that income, you can solve the different daily problems in life. And so we're advocating really for a vibrant economy. Then you do not need a Ministry of Housing, because you can access housing yourself in the private sector. You still need some subsidies, so we're saying you minimize, only maybe for affordability, maybe the interest rates or what have you for mortgaging, and you target the most vulnerable. If you have people that cannot really access the work job, the aging society, etc., and you reduce the loss of funding. So that is on subsidies, what we are trying. Before I get into the media strategy and talking a bit about the problem of vacant houses and ghost towns, South Africa immediately after the fall of the apartheid, they had of course a housing problem, and they had a 1 million housing unit program, reminiscent of the New Deal program. So what they did is they wanted to take people out of the shanty towns and out of the segregation, and they started to build these million units. In fact, they did build about 2 million units. What they did is they went to the cities and they moved outside, and because land is cheap or owned by government, and they started building those million units from 1993. About 10 years later, they started to evaluate the experience and to learn from it. And they found out, I'll just give you a few anecdotes. A woman that was living in a slum close to a factory, used to walk to work and come back. Now she's the proud owner of a piece of land, space, and a house on it. But economically, she pays 44%, nearly half her income on commuting. So in real daily terms, she's poorer income-wise, but she owns a house on a piece of land. Another person, a man, was given also a house, let's say in the east of the city, got a good job in the west of the city, but couldn't afford to commute. Two things in the law. One, you cannot give up your unit for 8 years. That's the agreement. And you cannot move or sublet it. And so he had to give up the job. So this segregation of housing and jobs has had its toll. A third complainant in this model was the municipality. The municipality found it too expensive just to collect garbage from all around the city because it's so spread out. So this dissatisfaction, academia thinking, NGOs discussing, putting the topic on the table, they went back to the drafting board 10 years later, and now they started to introduce the idea that we are interested in mixed use, mixed urban and housing, bringing housing to the center of the city, letting people live near where they work, near the education units, near health facilities and so on, and thus reducing the spread of the city, making more compact development and lesser footprint, better mobility, etc. So really looking at the issue from sustainability point of view. As I said, we're trying to use the media very much, so we're having popular and professional outreach, participatory advocacy, professional and key Habitat agenda partner inputs, political buy-in and partnerships with the Habitat agenda. So we are on the Urban Gateway. We have more than 2,700 members on the Global Housing Strategy. So we're networking by boosting website membership. LinkedIn, we are on over 90 professional groups, outreaching more than 600,000 professionals. And so this is popular professional outreach. Who is on LinkedIn here? Yes, so you might have seen some of this. We also have our own global housing strategy LinkedIn group with more than 1,000 members. And we have exchanges there and dialogues. Barry Pinsky from Rooftops International in Toronto, Canada, that works also in Eastern Africa, is asking here for case studies, manuals, and Jason there is giving advice. You decommodify, you do ABC. So there's an exchange there. So what are we advocating for? What are the criteria that we would like to see in housing? So from the perspective of urban planning and design, as I said, we would like to locate housing within the urban areas, not in isolated dormitory cities. Mixed use, very important. Improve mobility to introduce a rich variety of urban uses, and promote culturally viable city life and street life. Create economic opportunities. Remember, we said income is very important. So housing development does create jobs, and has been used by many countries to engage people in the industry. But we have to be very careful. If we subsidize the building and you get the jobs and the people working, if the buildings are not affordable and they're not transferable to people, you end up with a white elephant, and you have to subsidize people to access. And you end up with another cycle of subsidies. And therefore you have to be very careful with this. Again, we would like to, by the mixed use and having jobs and the private sector investing maybe in the first 2-3 floors of housing, and then on top you have housing, that you create jobs that people can just walk down the stairs maybe or just walk across the street and find a job, rather than commuting long hours. And encourage the private sector to invest in housing and mixed use. How many people commute more than half an hour from home to work? Okay, so not so many, that's a heavy sign. And of course, encourage the private sector to invest in housing and mixed use. Most of the Ministry of Housing that we spoke to say, we're building outside the city 70 kilometers in Tehran, 70 kilometers in Tehran outside the city. Seismic resistant, 19 stories, elevators, marble on the floor, very nice. They give it for 1/10 of the price of needing free to the poor. The poor don't go there. Why? The 70-kilometer commute is too expensive for them. So you talk to the people, and there's a hairdresser or someone working in a hairdresser shop in downtown Tehran. He prefers to stay in the slum next door because they cannot afford to move. There are no hairdresser shops in the suburb, in that dormitory town 70 kilometers outside. So he would have to commute to town. The person living 70 kilometers to get a haircut would also have to go to Tehran because we are dislocating the two. And the ministry says, oh, this is because the land is for free. We own the land and it's much cheaper. But we do know that in urban areas, if you're investing in a multi-story, multi-use building, you know that the first 2 or 3 would cover the cost of the land. And you can charge it to the investments and to the jobs and to the economic activities and to the bank, etc. And the rest can be subsidized. So you can achieve mixed use in downtown areas if you think about it properly. So introducing urban agriculture in cases where in a lot of places they have the nice layouts of these buildings and green grass in the middle. Why not introduce urban agriculture that creates jobs, food security, and an improved environment altogether? And then sharing land value. As I said, the value of the land can be introduced as solutions to finance and to cross-subsidize housing if you have investments on the ground floor and a different situation at all. Social integration, addressing social mobility through improved tenure, security, and housing units, encouraging social interaction, and avoiding the ghetto-gated community syndrome, and ensure that housing proposals are gender responsive. Environmental impact, achieving neighborhood environmental sustainability, improving microclimate, again through greening, but preferably with vegetation and urban agriculture. Governance and partnerships, that's towards the end of our model there. Producing housing through partnerships with key actors, including central and local government, as I mentioned, local authorities, NGOs, private sector, academia, and so on. Let us all think about housing and work together. Ministry of Housing that builds housing in the east of the city, and Ministry of Industry that builds housing in the west. Don't think about Ministry of Transport that's going to put the tramway and all the expenditures for commuting and the emissions that are resulting. These people have to talk together. We shouldn't think in silos and design and plan together. And then we're encouraging corporate social responsibility to subsidize housing for vulnerable groups. Reducing academic social responsibility. Academic social responsibility means that this is really inspired by universities in the north. Chalmers sends some students to Kisumu to spend 2-3 weeks working in the slums there and improving the living conditions. You know that the University of Nairobi, the students there do not see the slums and never been to the slums. And this is a scandal. We would like now the youth, the students to go out in their own cities, work in the slums, work on housing issues, work on design. Academic social responsibility is a new concept that we're putting on the table. And the students will be paid. And the best currency we have is A+, A-, B+, not below that. Let us have grades, let us get the enthusiasm of the youth, let them go out and serve their communities. They still learn a lot, even much more, because they're doing some practical work. And I recently heard of a new PSR, I don't know if you heard about it. The CSR, corporate social responsibility, ASR now, academic social, and PSR is professional social responsibility. Again, maybe the architectural firm can be given 2 months or a 1 month tax break if they do something for free for the lower income groups in the city, in the society. So again, these are ideas of addressing the need without dependency on the funding. I will end with a little talk about an international competition that we started this fall, from September till mid-January next year. It's in partnership with Mistral Futures, we have Habitat, we have the Union of International Architects on board, and the municipality of Medellin. We hope to we will announce the results in next April in Medellin at the World Urban Forum. And we think that this is an exciting way of engaging people in the concepts that we are promoting. This is the flyer. Who is eligible? We are thinking about university students, graduates and undergraduates, recent graduates after December 31st, 2010. And ideally multidisciplinary teams with backgrounds from architecture, planning, etc. So, we would like the competition teams to partner and to discuss the issues with the different partners. So institutions and local central authorities, they're the owners and managers of the housing stock, for example, Ministry of Housing or the local authority or the municipality. Academia are the think tank, the researchers, that will look at research elements, at best practices, and solution development, industry and private sector, urban economic development, job creation, economic development, and funding mechanisms, and civil society for the watchdog organizations represented by rights groups and owners associations. So we would like the competitors to talk to all these different groups. And we are mimicking a bit what we would like to see ministries of housing in cities and countries do when they address housing. So we're trying to do it through the competition, and we think that this will also change the thinking of the different types of partners. The timeline, we are now already in September, so the competition will have a national analysis, urban analysis, and housing analysis, and these we will crowdsource. Those who have best practices, we document them. So, for example, in your case here, in the Milione program, you have some very nice initiatives in Ankara and in other places where people have started beyond just putting insulation on the public housing to improve environmental sustainability. There are interventions that are on the urban aspect and introducing mixed uses and others, and a lot of social programs. then identifying the challenges. So these are the problem research components. Will be followed by proposals, where we'd like initiatives and sustainable solutions to the challenges, and then the concepts and policies. We would like to, because it's an international competition, and we would like the students to select, together with the local authority and the housing agency, a site of the mass housing in their own cities. The diversity makes it very complicated to exchange globally. So we would like them to distill the concepts and the policy implications, but then create a menu that people can exchange internationally, learn from each other. We want to see what does it mean and how is it working. Maybe we'll click and look at the solutions that they're proposing. And finally, further research. In a lot of cases, laws and legislation, urban zoning, urban planning does not allow you to put jobs and economic activities with housing. So you have to go back and review the legislation and the guidelines that prevent you from doing so. Then we have our evaluation through national juries, regional juries and the international jury, and then the results and the awards hopefully in April as well as the forum will be presented. Three types of jury, 3 levels of jury, the national, the regional, and the international. The numbers might differ, it depends on who we have. As partners, the MISRA is represented, so Lars Schwartz will be part of the international jury and the board of advisors. We have MIT on board, we have from Canada Housing Corporation, we have Housing Corporation South Africa. So we have a mix of academia, institutions, we have SDI, Slum Dwellers International, as an NGO on board, Housing for Humanity we're discussing, and some private sector, Minecraft, public spaces are also going to sponsor some of the prizes. And the municipality of Medellin is promising to give a prize of the design of joining a design group in their own city to design a building. So that would be the first prize. And this is the timeline, as I mentioned, of the prizes. So that is on the competition. My last slide is on expected outcomes of now the global housing strategy in general. We want to reposition housing within the global contemporary debate. Critical outcomes include, we want rights-based, gender-responsive, results-based national strategies, inclusive cities, access to adequate housing, paradigm shift, housing is part of urban planning and not systemic reforms promoted to improve the quality of life, linkages of housing and other parts of the economy strengthened, and sustainable building and urban neighborhood designs promoted. So this is a timeline. We have the World Urban Forum in 2014. Very important, we are also advocating for 2015, the post-development goals that are risking to not have housing and slum upgrading as part of them. And this to me is going to be will have a lot of dire consequences. And finally in 2016 we have Habitat 3 where we are going to redesign the urban agenda. That's
Thank you, Mohamed. Since I left, a lot has happened and you've developed more powerful concepts on maybe before. Very good, very interesting. I also see that you do mention what we call fair agreements, but you don't call for transparency. Isn't that what you do?
governance. Governance is transparency.
Transparency. Corruption.
Through governance. Through good governance, you have
Good governance. Because that was what you did with the global rental network. That we really start discussing the legalization and providing tools to change it. Are you developing that line now also, in tool production?
Yes, I mean, we are collaborating with the Jubilee network, and definitely we are looking at the whole idea of having a if you notice we are saying we make a national habitat committee which has NGOs, local authorities, academia, civil society, etc. That is transparency. That is bringing all people around the table and making sure that people's complaints and concerns are taken care of in an adequate way. Definitely, it's the key. Without that, you have no
Should we open up for questions from the floor?
Yes, please.
Yes.
To translate where I'm from, I will try to make it in English. I'm from an organization from the private sector that will be translated as economic growth for service of mankind. So this is the area of private sector that want to be participating in creating a sustainable society within the market area, so to say. And we are closely connected with Mr. Urban Future in communication. And I see that you very rapidly just mentioned private sector. Mustn't the private sector be a bigger part of this schedule, so to say?
Definitely.
And what is your suggestion for that? How do we operate in a more finance sector and a more private part that takes part of creating business? You must make money to make a sustainable society, including these dump areas to be built up in a proper way.
The whole idea of having a multidisciplinary group that is working together on housing is that we know that the money is with the private sector. And we've gone all the way that leaving it all to the market. We've left the housing to the market. On the one hand, we've been the socialist system that this total delivery of housing by central government didn't work in 1990 failed. 2008, the total market approach alone also doesn't work. And we need to really come somewhere in between. The Swedish model is very interesting in that case because you do have a lot of, and Chalmers here has a lot of very interesting partnerships between university, academia, private sector, and the local authorities. And that troika of the private sector and maybe guiding and financing a lot of the research work and the municipal work, that triangulation is very interesting. And that, through the exchanges, we would like to show other parts of the world how does this work. In many parts, the multinationals, etc., where greed really captures the minds of certain people, and you don't have the corporate social responsibility. The corporate social responsibility, as well as the PSC and the CSC, etc., these are very important to rethink and to plow back into society and to engage in a healthy way. Thank you, that's very important. And you know, the three Ps, the private sector, the private-public partnerships, I like to add a fourth one, private-public people partnerships. You need to listen to the people. That brings the transparency issue and makes sure that people's desires and demands are also incorporated.
We have one more question there.
I think it's lovely to hear that you talk about housing and work together, because I've been researching about that since the 1980s and wrote my thesis in 1992 about the mixture in the building scale. But now, when you talk about the developed countries in both Europe and in Asia, for example, they have a challenge that I didn't see mentioned here, and that is the aging society, and that we need housing in collaboration with care. That is also a challenge, so I just wonder why it's not here.
Because I was only given 30 minutes, but it is there for sure. And even in the competition, we mentioned that there are changing. You know, mass housing was built for a young family starting up, so it's usually young people. Germany are spending billions now to remake the housing, because some interesting designs, a lot of architects here, I'm also an architect, where you have a split level, you enter at the level, you go down half a floor and you go up a floor. With aging and with crippling and other things, you cannot afford that. So they're retrofitting the buildings to make the lift arrive at each floor, and so you can have easy access. That's a very important, very high investment. And the reason why we're looking at existing built environment is that urban lessons are expensive and take time. So only now are you re-looking at the Miljöne program some 40, 50 years afterwards. because the building and the people who originally lived there are no longer there. You have social segregation, you have communities that are settling where people are moving out, and there are new problematics that are happening. So even in a stable environment like this one, you do have issues in Anglo, just north of your city here, right? So revisiting the existing built environment to analyze, and it's a post-occupancy, let's say 40, 50 years later, but that you can really withdraw the lessons and learn what went wrong and what could go wrong. And we hope that these we can transmit to other countries by saying, okay, be careful because this is going to happen. Please make the lift arrive at the floor. Let's not do these fancy designs of the 50s and the 60s where split levels were nice and so on. So you really rethink and you will come back to practicality. The 60s showed us an era where no windows were opening, right? Because fuel was cheap. The 70s told us, no, let's open the windows please and let's get the fresh air in. So we learned expensive lessons, and this is an opportunity to do that and to share the lessons globally.
We have one question at the back. For comment?
Yes. Okay, my question is about the ways, the methods, or the methods you are using to make governments, states use your strategies or to adopt your strategies. Are there any?
Good question. Severally, on the political front, we've had, we developed, maybe a year ago, we were talking about the global housing strategy, and we started to get inputs. We crowdsourced on the internet, and we started to get feedback. Then we developed the global housing strategy framework. We introduced it to our governing council, so it's the UN, it's the states in the UN that adopted it. So now it is an official document that has been adopted by our governing council, UN Habitat. But we are also advocating a lot for it. This competition is one of the ways that we are doing it. We are asking the students and the competitors to contact the local authority or central government and together select the site. So already you're bringing to their attention that we're looking at their housing, that they're looking at their own housing conditions. We hope that the analysis and the issues that are raised are shared within that teamwork, and that eventually the people that are the local authorities would maybe, hopefully, and housing ministries learn some of these approaches and say, okay, why don't we try that? And the private sector, we are really advocating that if the private sector is interested in funding some of those, the implementation of some of those solutions on the ground, that would be fantastic. Our dream is really to have the students not get financial prizes, get A+, A-, but indeed that the prize goes to implementing on the ground. So if we have 6 regions in the world. If we get 50,000, 100,000 from a private sector firm, construction industry or whatever, that could be used to implement some of those ideas in the open space or in improving, revitalizing the housing complexes. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. So a lot of advocacy, and when we go and advise ministries, we tell them this and these are issues that you have to take care of.
Mohamed, I think we might have to conclude. I would like to finalize by saying that both you have it, Mr. Futures is trying to provide better policies, well-supported better policies, and also institutions and actors who can implement it. So we're similar target. But you might want to read Dagens Nyheter, the major Swedish newspaper today, where 5 universities start a debate whether or not the Swedish National Science Council should demand that the research that they carry out is useful. It's an interesting question because when the University of Manchester did graphene, nobody knew what it was good for. But in the business of where we are, urban knowledge production, as you say, we must learn from what we have done. We must make incremental and transformative improvements. I think that we are on the same side. But read it. Okay. Ulrika?
Thank you so much.
Mohamed, and thank you, Lars. And now it's time for food, and we'll have salmon and sauce, and also if you are vegetarian, you can challenge the cuisine to give you the right food. Next Urban Lunch time is the 15th of October, and it's EQ Samhällsbyggnad is coming. And then we have 2 more left in this autumn, and you'll find them on our website. And you also, this lecture here was, we had, it was placed to film this lecture, and we are going to put it on our website. Hopefully, it's the first time, so we cross our fingers that it will work. And you can also find your presentation at Mr. Urban Future's website.
And maybe we should say also that you will be working with us on and off for a year from now. So you'll be coming back. If you're interested in having a more private discussion with Mohamed, Ulrika, Jenny here, and Susanne can help you, right? Etc. You might be interested in talking more about the business, city, or the region, or whatever.
Absolutely. Perhaps somewhere in the audience, perhaps there are some thoughts about making a team. And that would be nice, wouldn't it? And also, if the private sector has some sort of thoughts on the price, that would also be good, wouldn't it? So please you can contact me, or also we will give our words to Mohamed. So please, the food is served.